Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to the letter T from my alphabet of favourite films. I'm going to do a quick disclaimer. The letter T is not fooling around. There's some cheese in here, there's some culty pulp, but there's also quite simply some of the greatest films ever made and some of my favourite films of all time. So it's certainly a mixed bag, but there's quite a few. What I will say again, there is no question in my mind that I've probably forgotten some. So again, this is an interactive series, so please leave me your list of the letter T, because there's going to be a bunch that should be on this list that I've just completely forgotten when I've dug the discs out, or ones I haven't seen, or ones that I need to rewatch that aren't on this list that I've probably put on my list, but haven't actually managed to dig them out because there's just so many. The first one I'm not going to dig out is by Bergman, and it's Through a Glass Darkly. Myself and Nazarin Prod on our collaboration channel, Ronin Nazarin Talks, we have started a Bergman season where we're going to chat about 2 different Bergman films. The first episode is up, and that was Wild Strawberries and Smiles of a Summer Night. And Through a Glass Darkly will feature in the second episode, but I won't tell you with what other film. So I'll be rewatching Through a Glass Darkly in the next couple of weeks to talk about it on that channel. It has been a while since I've seen it, but I always really liked it. So we'll move on to ones that I can actually hold up and witter on about for a little while. But again, leave your comments below and leave your lists, because that's part of the joy of doing this season. So these are not in alphabetical order, these are not in order of preference, they are literally in order of the ones that I remembered to dig out. So let's start with La Tête contre le Mur, or Head Against the Wall, by Georges Franju, starring his usual collaborator Pierre Brasseur. And this is a lovely little French film about life in a sanitarium, or an asylum even. Yeah, it's a really nice little film from 1959. Not Franju's best, but it's certainly worth checking out. It's way better than One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or even Short Corridor. Next is a fun little film which I knew nothing about, which is Triangle. It's a lovely little film by Christopher Smith, who did Creep and Severance, but Triangle is way better than those fairly average films. It's got a nice little conceit, and it's a lot of fun, and you can pick this up for almost pennies. Next is Train to Busan, the Korean zombie film. Just when you thought you were tired of zombie films, Train to Busan came along in 2016 and really reinvigorated it. It's actually quite moving in places. It's dynamic, and it literally is a thrill ride. just to juxtaposition that, Orson Welles' The Trial, or Le Procès, from 1961. This Studio Canal print is beautiful. As usual with Orson Welles, the shot composition is mouth-watering. Yeah, it seems to be more relevant as the days go by, about a man accused of a crime that he's got no idea what he's accused of, as he goes through this bizarre legal process. Orson Welles turns up himself, Jean Moreau. It's a beautiful, troubling, dark, strange little film, but it's essential Welles. Next is one of the first true masterpieces of the letter T, and this is Thin Red Line by Terrence Malick. My favourite Malick film. I personally think this is his best film. Came out a wee bit after Saving Private Ryan, and of course everybody, well not everybody, but rather a lot of people thought Saving Private Ryan was like the greatest war film ever made. It wasn't even the greatest war film made that year. Terrence Malick just uses sound and light. He shows the effects of war on the psyche, but also on the natural world, the damage that we do to ourselves and the world, and nature. It's a beautiful film. Yeah, I mean, you need some patience with it. I think you need that for all Malick films. If you're a fan of war films and you like the slam bam action, that's not really what this is about. In those war films, well, sometimes there's a place for them. Thin Red Line is not that film, and it is, I know I don't like using the word masterpiece and it is bandied about a lot, but Thin Red Line is a masterpiece. And then with, again, switching to Theatre of Blood with Vincent Price. Vincent Price is a faded actor who kills off his most savage critics by deaths featured in Shakespeare plays. It's a great wee film. Some of the deaths are rather nasty. It has quite an all-star cast. Ian Hendry, Harry Andrews, Coral Brown, Jack Hawkins, Michael Hordern, Arthur Lowe, Robert Morley, Dennis Price, Diana Rigg. It's a wonderful little late Vincent Price film, and it's a lot of fun. Different tack again, which will be a common theme. Powell and Pressburger's awesome Tales of Hoffmann. I remember seeing this for the first time on television with adverts, because it was one of their kind of forgotten films, and there's just scenes in it that are just jaw-dropping. Such a beautiful film. If you love Powell and Pressburger, you'll have it already, but if you want an experience that is kind of ravishing to the eyes and the soul, and it's not perfect, but it's just a stunning piece of work. Yeah, it's an amazing. I did actually, when I used to go to the cinema, I did actually see it in the GFT in its restoration, which was quite the experience. Next is Taxi Driver, one of the few Scorsese classic films that I think actually stands the test of time. As you may have known if you follow the channel, Scorsese used to be quite high on my list of favourite directors, but he's fallen fairly far. But I think Taxi Driver is one of his supposed masterworks that actually does hold up. I don't think Raging Bull has survived the test of time. I don't think Mean Streets has survived the test of time. I I still like Goodfellas, but I'm weird, and for me, his best film's Age of Innocence, or my favourite one of his films is Age of Innocence. Next is one of the most influential films of all time in a specific genre. It's Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a film that he never bettered. It's a film that it's a rough experience from 1974. Wonderful year that was. It set the template for slashers, but this has a really nasty kind of feel to it. Shot it in the middle of summer. You can almost smell the decay. The acting is not great, but the atmosphere, the feel of the film, you do feel as though you've watched something dirty and unsavoury. And like I said, Tobe Hooper never came close to making a film as good. Next is a pulp favourite, and it's The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas and Omar Sharif, bizarrely. Directed by John McTiernan. Based on a Michael Crichton book, Eaters of the Dead, I believe. It had a terrible production history. It is a kind of Viking Seven Samurai, which can't go wrong with Seven Samurai. There's a lot of fun to be had. There's a lovely device in how Antonio Banderas, who's an outsider, comes to kind of learn the language of the Vikings. It's a nice device so we don't have to have subtitles throughout the whole film. It's a lot of fun, even in its kind of messed up cut, truncated form. It's a lot of fun. Never going to be on the greatest film of all time list. Next is Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall. Again, we maybe wish that Cronenberg, who was originally planned to make it, obviously without Schwarzenegger, as soon as Schwarzenegger got attached to it, Cronenberg was out. But then Mel Brooks gave Cronenberg The Fly as some kind of recompense. If you understand what the whiteout at the end of the film actually means, it takes on a whole more level of goodness. Doesn't really make any sense, but you know what I mean if you know what I mean. Next is The Thing from Another World, not directed by Howard Hawks, allegedly, directed by Christian Nyby, whoever that was. That's disrespectful to the whole Nyby family. But there's a huge Howard Hawks influence, obviously. Yes, it's a big vegetable man. Yes, John Carpenter surpassed it, but there's still a lot of charm to be had for it. There's still the stereotypical scientist who wants to learn from the creature, and obviously gets his head caved in. Next, Time After Time, which is a film I either had not seen or had not seen for decades. Starring Malcolm McDowell as the good guy, which is just bizarre. He stars as H.G. Wells. David Warner stars as Jack the Ripper, and using H.G. Wells' time machine, he escapes to San Francisco in 1979 it was made. And H.G. Wells then follows him to 1979 San Francisco, and it's a wonderful fish out of water film. David Warner gives a great performance as Jack the Ripper and makes lots of interesting points about society and their attitude to violence even in 1979. So obviously 40 years later it's just as bad or even worse. It really surprised me. It's a hugely enjoyable little film. Great support by Mary Steenburgen. Next is They Made Me a Fugitive on Powerhouse Indicator. Again, a film I'd never seen. I recently did a random review on it. Trevor Howard gives a great performance, as does Griffith Jones as the psychopathic leader of the gang that are trying to have framed Trevor Howard for the murder of a policeman. It's a rollicking, great little film. You should check out if you've never heard of it, as I had never heard of it. Next is Fritz Lang's Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which, I'll be honest, I haven't seen for years, and I really need to watch it again. Next is 3 Days of the Condor, Sidney Pollack with Robert Redford and a load of spies. But this is just a good excuse to talk about Max von Sydow, who sadly went to have a game of chess this week. Max von Sydow, the more you think about it, or the more I think about it, you could actually argue he's the greatest actor of all time. When you consider the range that he did, he can play amiable paragons of goodness. He can play really menacing villains. I mean, he was the Emperor of the Universe. He played a game of chess with death. Struggling artist. He was a serial killer solving psychiatrist. He invented getting into people's dreams. He had obviously a wonderful career with Bergman, but then he had a wonderful Hollywood career, but also still made European art house cinema. He is, I think, on the list of the few actors who could be called the greatest actor of all time. The amount of joy and kind of being impressed by his body of work is quite phenomenal. So I just wanted to bring him up and thank him for his career and certainly making my life better, and I'm sure many film fans would concur. So, on a different tact again, Trouble in Paradise by Ernst Lubitsch, which is a wonderful screwball comedy about a career thief and romance that gets in the way, because romance is a form of burglary as well. Next is Charles Burnett's To Sleep with Anger, which I recently did a random review of. You can check that out to hear what I thought of it. But it's a really nice little film. A view of South Central Los Angeles that we don't really see very often. Next is Hal Hartley's Trust, which is an image from the film there. If you haven't seen Hal Hartley, Trust is a very good place to start. His wonderful, unique dialogue, the wonderful Adrienne Shelley, who sadly is no longer with us, and the wonderful Martin Donovan. Trust is a blast. Next, Choi Min-sik in The Tiger, which is a really wonderful film set in the Japanese occupation of Korea, and it's one man's battle with a seemingly immortal tiger. Beautifully done. The CG in the tiger is really well done. It doesn't jar on the screen. It's fairly believable. It's a really good yarn. Next is Bill Forsyth's That Sinking Feeling from 1979. A lo-fi story about a group of Glasgow guys who are desperate and decide to steal sinks. Yeah, there's nothing more to be said about that apart from it has a lot of charm. There are subtitles if you're struggling with the Glasgow accents. It doesn't actually say that it's complete with original Glaswegian dialogue track. It's a really enjoyable little film. Next, Too Late for Tears, with Lisbeth Scott and Dan Duryea. This is one of the Arrow Academy titles that I would urge you to pick up. It's one of their restoration projects from a film that I'd never heard of, but blimey, it's fantastic. It's just amazing. It's about a couple who happen to have a windfall. A car's driving by them and they throw a suitcase and it happens to be full of money. And it's your classic how money changes people and greed. It's just so good. Lisbeth Scott is absolutely blistering in it. Yeah, I can't recommend this one enough. If you like your noir, it's fantastic. Next is Karida's Third Murder. This is an interesting film, because hopefully I won't be incorrect, but for the Japanese legal system only recently reintroduced juries. They didn't have juries. Pretty much the prosecution and the defence would essentially come to, they would bargain and come to a kind of agreement. So the presumption of guilt was pretty much already made by the time things get to court. So there's no jury, and it's essentially just how the judge will decide what the punishment will be almost. This starts with a man murdering another man. He also did a murder 30 years ago, but also obviously as the story goes on, it's kind of a search for the truth because he keeps changing his story. It's a really interesting little film. On first blush you could say it's a little bit different from Karida's other films, but then it's about kind of family and humanity, so it's not really that different from his other films. This won't be getting a Hollywood remake anytime soon. There's no chase scenes or action scenes or, courtroom shouting between lawyers or catching people out in a lie in the courtroom. That's not really how the Japanese legal system works, or certainly the Japanese legal system that is shown in this film works. It's a really understated but kind of quietly assured little film. Next is Kim Ji-woon's second film, I believe, A Tale of Two Sisters, which is not my favourite Kim Ji-woon, but it's got a nice sense of dread. It's exquisitely shot. It's well worth checking out. Next is Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, which I have still not watched the extended version, which I would guess has more Sean Penn in it, because Sean Penn did complain that he wasn't actually in the theatrical cut that much. Not sure what it all means, but it's quite an experience, put it that way. And again, I really need to watch the extended cut. I'm not the hugest Terrence Malick fan. Like I said, Thin Red Line is certainly for me his masterpiece. Next, Park Chan-wook's Thirst, his take on the vampire mythos. Where are we? Second pile, True Stories by David Byrne. I'm a huge David Byrne fan musically, huge Talking Heads fan. This is just such a fun little quirky film as David Byrne visits a small American town and the people therein. The soundtrack's great. Also it helps if you like Talking Heads and David Byrne. It's got a great cast, John Goodman in his kind of first leading role. Spalding Gray's fantastic. Pop Staples, who one of the leaders of the Staple Singers, who's very close to my heart. I love Pop Staples and the Staple Singers. He turns up. It's a beautiful little film. Perhaps not to everybody's taste, but wonderful. Now I have a pile of DVDs. The first is 32 short films about Glenn Gould by Francois Girard, which really needs an upgrade to Blu-ray. It's a biopic, but a biopic in a really interesting and fresh form. It is essentially 32 short films about Glenn Gould, played by an actor who I cannot remember, but he's been in a lot of things. Hopefully somebody will remind me in the comments. And it's just literally short films which try and explain the artist. Some of them are just interviews from him on audio tape. Some of them are just pieces of music. It's a really interesting kind of mosaic approach to try and understand the artist, and it's really good, and the music's really good. He recorded a lot of Bach pieces on his piano, and it's awesome. Next is Thesis, a little film from Spain from 1996, which is about snuff movies. That is a mixed bag. Next, bizarrely, is another Spanish film, Time Crimes, which is a really fun little low budget film about time travel, but not in the big grand sense, in the smaller sense, like Primer by Shane Carruth. Again, this could really do with a Blu-ray. If it hasn't got one already, please let me know. With all these DVDs, I think Thesis does have a Blu-ray release, but I'm not sure about Time Crimes. Next is The Tin Star, with Henry Fonda and Anthony Perkins in a western. Anthony Perkins as a struggling young sheriff, and Henry Fonda comes into town, the grizzled veteran who kind of teaches him about life and how to be a sheriff. It's a great wee film. Again, probably needs an upgrade, please. Speaking of which, Bresson's Trial of Joan of Arc. For me, not as good as The Passion of Joan of Arc by Dreyer, but still very good in its usual Bresson type way. If you know Bresson, you know what I mean. And Trees Lounge, Steve Buscemi's directorial debut, which is a lovely little film about barflies, starring Buscemi himself, Chloe Sevigny. It's just a lovely little film that fell between the cracks because it's not really got box office appeal, but it's beautifully acted, beautifully written. It's just a great wee film that probably deserves, well, it does deserve a Blu-ray upgrade. So back to the Blu-rays. This pile has some heavy hitters in it, starting with The Three Colours by Sheslovsky. Anybody who's familiar with this channel knows that I love Sheslovsky. It's still upsetting to think that he went way too soon. Two of these are straight up masterpieces, and Three Colours White is still very good and a 4-star film out of 5. But Blue and Red are straight up masterworks. Yeah, that's all you need to say. If you've never seen them, what are you doing with your life? Next is Tokyo Story. Again, I haven't seen enough Ozu, but certainly Tokyo Story and Late Spring are straight up fantastic. I've got a bunch of his stuff in the proverbial backlog. Next, we're in fantastic territory. It's Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, in the conversation for my favourite David Lynch film, in the conversation for his best film. I actually did see this in the cinema. It was really interesting because people who were not familiar with David Lynch's cinematic output but loved Twin Peaks, the TV show, perhaps not for the dark stuff but more just for the kind of soap opera on the surface gloss stuff, they then went to see this and were horrified. Bizarrely, it's only a 15 for the BBFC. I'm sure it was an 18 for a lot of time. It is a scary, disturbing film, and it scared off quite a lot of people who were Twin Peaks TV fans. The critics hated it. It really put a dent in David Lynch's confidence. He didn't work for a lot of years. It almost ended his career. But now, looking back on it, I think most people would actually say it's almost a work of genius. Next is Tremors, a perfect example of a creature feature that is well written, well acted, well structured. It spawned sequels of varying quality from okay to unwatchable. Kevin Bacon, one of his career turns. It's just a perfect example of a genre film done really well, because people think it's easy doing a creature feature. It's not. Speaking of genre films that are done really well, 30 Days of Night, the wonderful little vampire film that has the wonderful twist of being set in Barrow, Alaska, which has 30 days of darkness, which isn't ideal when a bunch of vampires come to town. And these are vampires that are way different from the Interview with a Vampire, the stately vampire. These are more animalistic. These are fast moving. These have no humanity in them whatsoever. They're savage. It's really well done. It's a really nice device to get rid of most of the population, because they just use the thing of a lot of the population go south because they can't stand 30 days of darkness. So you're automatically whittled down to less people, which is obviously what you need for a film like this. Again, never really stops. Well paced, well acted, and it has a realistic ending. It is pretty heavy on the gore. It really gave the vampire film a much needed shot in the neck, because they were becoming a bit pompous and a bit kind of, vampires had kind of lost, they were distanced from being kind of scary creatures of the night, whereas these guys are fairly scary. Next is The Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, which is an absolutely beautiful little film directed by Tommy Lee Jones. Again, I'm not the biggest Tommy Lee Jones fan, but this is a really well made film. Also stars Barry Pepper and Melissa Leo. It kind of jumps back and forward in time, but it doesn't do it in a showy way. As Tommy Lee Jones is wanting to return the corpse of his fallen friend Melquiades Estrada back to his hometown. It's a film that pretty much came out of nowhere. Again, I think I saw that late night in BBC Two. It's absolutely beautiful. The tone's wonderful. It takes its own time. It's not in a rush. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. Next is 2001 by Kubrick. I first saw this in a black and white television when I was very young, and I think I saw it halfway through and it confused the hell out of me. Even though I know how they did things, it still blows my mind whenever I watch it. When Keir Dullea is running round, is jogging around the big wheel, it still blows my mind how they did that, even though I know how they did it. People do go on about the bone being thrown in the air and it cuts to a spaceship, but people have to remember Michael Powell did that 25 years earlier in A Canterbury Tale when a hawk turns to a Spitfire. Yes, there's stuff with monkeys at the start, which perhaps could have been a little shorter, but it's still a marvel. Made in 1968. It's pretty phenomenal. Again, it's a film you can put whatever meaning you really want to put in it, which is always good for art. I think you can always interpret it however you want to interpret it. So from 2001 to Torso, by Sergio Martino, which is a really fun little giallo. That's all you need to say. 2001 to Torso. That's pretty much what I'm going for. Next is John Carpenter's probably his most underrated great film, is They Live, with Rowdy Roddy Piper and the wonderful Keith David, as a film that is, strangely enough, still very relevant as far as consumerism and panic buying about things. Yeah, it's got a great score. People talk about the big fight scene between Keith David and Roddy Piper, where they have a fight for seemingly 10 minutes. But the film's a lot more than that. It has another realistic Carpenter ending. It's just an absolute joy. It's a joy to behold. Next is Them, from 1954. This is actually Premium Collection HMV number 1. This is one of the best atomic power is going to cause animals to mutate film. In this case it's giant ants, even though if you know the respiratory system of ants, you know they can't actually grow to past a certain size. But atomic power, giant ants. It's really well done. It's really set up well in the beginning because you don't really know what's caused these killings, and you know it's really well done. And the actors do deliver the lines with a seriousness that is deserving of a film of giant ants. Next is the Indicator release of Torture Garden, which is a fun little Amicus portmanteau film. Again, I did a video on top 10 portmanteau, which you will find somewhere on this channel. Next is another Powerhouse Indicator release, 10 Rillington Place, starring Richard Attenborough, directed by Richard Fleischer, based on a true story, and it's really creepy. Richard Attenborough, again, I'm not the biggest fan of, but he gives a really disturbing performance as a little man who does some killing. Richard Attenborough himself said that when he got home from set at night he actually felt unclean because he got like so far into the character. Next is a late Robert Aldrich film, Twilight's Last Gleaming, which is an essential Burt Lancaster film. He stars as a general who has had enough and decides to fire atomic weapons on America. He's tired of the Vietnam War. Charles Durning's in it, Richard Widmark. It's not perfect, but there's so much to like in it. Burt Lancaster's fantastic in it. Everybody's fantastic in it. It's a wee gem, even though, like I said, it's not perfect. Next, Touch of Evil. It's another Stone Cold classic. You could make the argument Orson Welles started film noir and Citizen Kane. and put an exclamation on it in 1958 with Touch of Evil. This is such a black and white film. Charlton Heston as a Mexican is perhaps not the greatest casting in the world, but Orson Welles is wonderful as Quinlan. Marlena Dietrich, again, kind of almost hidden. She gets all the best lines at the end of the film. Obviously famous for the opening tracking shot, but there's so much weird stuff in it. Dennis Weaver has a very strange, twitchy owner of a motel. I don't know when Robert Bloch wrote Psycho, before Hitchcock made it in 1960, but there's a lot of Anthony Perkins and Dennis Weaver's performance, and let's be honest, we all know Orson Welles is better than Hitchcock, so just had to get that in. Always have to get some Hitchcock abuse in somewhere. 12 Angry Men by Sidney Lumet, perfect example of an ensemble cast and ensemble writing, starring the awesome Henry Fonda, Lee J. Cobb, Ed Begley, E.J. Marshall, Jack Warden, Martin Balsam, John Fiedler, Jack Klugman, Edward Binns, Joseph Sweeney, George Vosovic, and Robert Webber, written by Reginald Rose. You all know 12 Angry Men. Next is another one of my all-time favourites, To Be or Not to Be by the wonderful Ernst Lubitsch. Not the Mel Brooks remake. This is the Jack Benny and the luminous, I'm biased as hell, Carole Lombard, who is just radiant in this. She's hilarious in it. Made in 1942, and it's about an acting troupe in Warsaw pretending to be Nazis. It's just so good. Robert Stack turns up, desperately trying to be serious. It's a masterpiece. It's just fantastic. I literally could watch To Be or Not to Be all day long. Next, Suzuki's Tokyo Drifter. Mad, Bad, and Inglorious Technicolor. Just a wonderful little film. Great score. The song will have you humming it for weeks after you watch it. Next, Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which bizarrely might actually be my favourite Kurosawa film. It's famously his kind of reworking of Macbeth, starring Toshiro Mifune. Stunning compositions. What else can I say? It's Kurosawa, it's Mifune, it's Shakespeare, it's awesome. Next is Michael Mann's Thief, or Violent Streets, aka. Starring James Caan in one of his best roles, with James Belushi, Robert Prosky in one of arguably his most threatening, Willie Nelson, and an early performance by Dennis Farina, who would obviously appear later in Michael Mann masterpiece Manhunter as well as Crime Story. It's more a nuts and bolts film about a thief who gets involved with the mafia in the shape of Robert Prosky's crew, but then obligations, and essentially it's a take on a small business being taken over by a big business and how that just doesn't really work out for the small business. Tangerine Dream did the soundtrack. Next, it's Poe, it's Corman, it's Price, it's The Tomb of Ligeia, which is arguably my favourite of those collaborations. Next is a little Korean film, Tinker Ticker. This is a Plain Archive edition, which again I usually don't need an excuse to show off Plain Archive because they are beautiful editions. This is a fun little film about a teenage boy who likes to make bombs, and he falls in with a kind of other young guy who's a bit more of an anarchist. It's an interesting little film. The last three are Stone Cold classics. Stone Cold, probably, well, granted my top 20 films of all time probably have like 50 films in them, but one of these films is in the argument for my favourite film of all time, and it's The Third Man. The Third Man is one of those few films that for me is literally perfect. It's perfectly shot. I mean, you will literally go through the film going, oh my god, look at that shot, look at that shot, look at that shot, look at that shot, look at the composition in that shot's amazing. The soundtrack, the acting performances, obviously Orson Welles turns up and gives wonderful speeches, then leaves again. But Joseph Cotten is his best performance. Alida Valli is absolutely luminous, but also damaged. There's romance in it, but it's doomed failed romance, my favourite kind. It's got one of the best endings of all time, which never really gets talked about. How they actually managed to do it without studio interference is just amazing. I don't know what else to say about this, apart from it's perfect, and it is in the conversation for my favourite film of all time with a few more films. But I mean, if I said this was my favourite film of all time, I don't think there would be, I wouldn't argue with myself too much. Obviously it might change, but it's a stunning film. Carol Reed from 1949. Again, it's a perfect blend of the dialogue. I mean, the banter between Joseph Cotten and Trevor Howard's character is just so advanced for 1949. It's a stunning film on every single level. Obviously, most of you will have seen it, but it's, oh, what a film! It's it's fantastic. Next is another film that's just absolutely awesome. Taken of Pelham 123, Robert Shaw and Walter Matthau, and also the Taken of Pelham 123, the Kino Lorber 40th anniversary edition. A quintessential 70s film, perhaps one of the quintessential 70s films, from 1974, good year. About the hijacking of a subway train. Again, you've probably all seen it, and perhaps you think it's a good film but not a great film. But it's a great film. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've seen it. It's just so enjoyable, endlessly rewatchable. Walter Matthau's fantastic, and again, strangely enough, it has an amazing ending. Bizarrely, the last three films, I'm on to the last one next, the last three films all have some of the best endings of all time. So next on the list, as you probably will have guessed, is The Thing, or Das Ding in German. I do have various versions of this film, just because I love it, just like Raw Sewage, I love it. It's the perfect example of a genre film executed so well, apart from maybe seeing the spaceship at the start of the film. Don't really need that. It's a perfect ensemble cast, even though we don't get hugely deep characterizations. By the characters' actions, we kind of know what kind of person they are. So, for example, when Bennings gets shot and he asks Knowles to turn the radio down, Knowles just pretends to, but doesn't. So you kind of automatically know his relationship with Bennings. The fact that these guys work together in an isolated environment, but they still all call each other by their last name, tells you so much. We're dropped right in it. We, apart from the spaceship at the start, we don't know what they don't know. It is, you can read pretty much everything into it, as far as infection, as far as AIDS, as far as any disease, how we react to people who may be infected, how that changes our attitude to people. It has lots of fan theories. Again, it's got one of the greatest endings of all time. Bizarrely, they did actually shoot a more definitive ending with Childs and Macready getting brought back to civilization, which I'm so glad they decided not to do it. It was a box office disaster. The Thing and Blade Runner came out in the same year as E.T., and obviously E.T. was just a phenomenon, even though it's a terrible film. And certainly the passage of time, you don't really hear people saying what's the best film from 1982 and people say E.T. It's between Blade Runner and The Thing. It has a great Ennio Morricone score, even though it's kind of Ennio Morricone does John Carpenter. It's made the art form of just going dun 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 dun. I mean, who knew it'd be that simple? The practical effects by Rob Bottin are amazing. Yes, there's a bit of stop motion later in the film, which is perhaps hasn't aged that well. Kurt Russell gives a career performance. It's just a great film. It's a perfect example of a genre film done really well, executed really well. It also has a couple of the best making of documentaries. One called Terror Takes Shape. Yeah, The Thing is a fairly fitting place to stop with the letter T. So I hope you have made it to the end of this video. I apologise for the random wittery. And again, I apologise if I've forgotten your favourite film beginning with the letter T. I've probably forgot some of mine. But again, leave your in the comments below, because I'm looking forward to reading your lists. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully we'll see you for the letter U as we approach the end of the alphabet of favourite films. This is Solitary Ronin saying farewell.